Fueled by C4, Cellucor, and Extend. Use the code Clydesdale to get 20% off the checkout at c4energy.com. On Clydesdale Media, where we bring you the widest array of content here on our YouTube channel. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. Hit that notifier so you're the first to know when new episodes are available. What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Clydesdale Media Podcast, where we are featuring the athletes of the 2023 CrossFit Semifinals. And not only that, we have the privilege of having none only than the professor himself, Brent Fikowski, with us. Brent, how you doing?
Howdy. I'm good. How are you guys doing?
Good. Welcome.
I am real good. So excited to have you on the show. Last time you were on, we talked about a lot of stuff, and it was such a great conversation. I'm so glad that you decided to come back and join us a second time.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to be here. I really enjoyed that last chat too.
So I've got a lot of stuff, and we'll probably bounce around a lot. But I want to start with some fun stuff. When we talked last year, it was right going into the games, I believe, last year. And you had spent the off season with busy family things and didn't get to compete or anything like that in last year's off season. This year, that changed a bit. You actually went to Wodapalooza, competed as an individual and on a team, winning the team division. What was one? You guys were fun to watch. It just was the outfits.
And I heard you were the one in charge of the outfits. Is that true?
Yeah, that was my, we wanted to match to some extent. And so we kind of made sure we had some, we had different sponsors. So it was like, just black shorts, red shirts, plain shoes, whatever. And then I was like, oh, we should do something, whether it's like a headband or, I don't know, like a toque, like something Canadian. And so, I was able to find the sleeveless flannel shirts. And so that was my doing. Yeah.
Perfect.
So we had Jeff on the show, and we asked him, like, were those restrictive at all? And he said, surprisingly not. They were actually pretty comfortable to wear on the competition floor.
Yeah. They were, we probably would have worn them a bit more. I think we only wore them twice. But we just really wanted to make sure they weren't interfering with anything. So I think there was a workout or two where that'd be, no, we can't wear them. So, but yeah, we were able to wear them on two, and in the workouts we chose, they were completely fine. But yeah, we're all fairly, I'm probably more particular than some, but, we're pretty mindful that certain shirts definitely have an advantage over others. And yeah, I think cutting off the sleeves, I mean, lets you breathe, right? It just kind of frees up that shoulder motion,
Yeah. And Kenneth says start growing matching mustaches for next year.
Oh man, that would be next level. Something to consider for sure.
So I'm curious, would you ever do that again? Would you ever compete as an individual and as a team again like that in a weekend?
I don't know. It was a lot. I think everyone that did it was kind of like, oh, it was fine, but yeah, it was a lot. I'm not sure I would do both again, or I might do the individual. And what kind of happened was, by the time the team rolled around, a lot of teams were changing faces because of people, with a little injury here or there. And so maybe I do individual and just kind of leave it as an option. Like, oh, maybe I'll sub in on a team if they're looking, like they need a good player and, they have a good team and I'm feeling good, and kind of leave it up to chance. Because, if those workouts, let's say it was 2 days and 2 days again, if the workouts on the first 2 days are really taxing, I just might not have the juice to do the next 2 days without, sustaining an injury. So
for sure.
You've been an individual athlete your whole career. What was it like being on a team? Was that your first foray into that, or?
No, I mean, my first year in CrossFit, I went to a lot of kind of intermediate competitions when I lived in Australia, and did a lot of team events there. So I probably did more team events than individual my first kind of year of competing. And then I did the CrossFit Invitational. I went to Wodapalooza on a team twice. I won it in I think it was 16 or 17, with two Canadians, Mitch Barnard and ADL from Montreal. So not completely inexperienced on the team. It's definitely different. I think what I described, at least in my experience, was when I'm warming up for the teams, I'm a lot more nervous. Like I don't want to let the guys down, and you're like, there's a lot more kind of strategy going into it. Okay, how are we going to break this up? If that doesn't work, what are we going to do? But then once you're out there, it's a lot more fun. Like the actual act of competing on a team on the floor, I found a lot more enjoyable and a little less stressful. Individuals, I kind of feel the other way around. When I'm warming up, I'm like keeping myself calm. I feel very in control. I know what I have to do. I've got a plan for everything. I know how my body's feeling and what I'm going to do. And then when you're out there as an individual, I'm not like stressed, but it's very hectic. It's a lot more painful usually. And it's, things are happening very fast and the stakes seem kind of higher. And, you're trying to like take in all this information as an individual, kind of like the Terminator mask. And you're okay, who am I racing? How am I going to beat them? How's my body feeling? What's my judge saying? Okay, what was my strategy? All those sorts of things. It seems to move a lot faster and frenetically. Frenetically. Wait a second. I'm thinking of the Philly Frenetic or something. Really, yeah. I was watching Semi in Philadelphia, so I'm all looped up. But yeah, so that's how that was the difference that I personally felt.
I love the analogy with a Terminator mask. That makes so much sense. Like you're taking in all this information and trying to process it in a short amount of time.
Yeah, and I think that's and that's probably more so the case in a sport with like offense and defense, but in CrossFit, in some workouts, some events, there's definitely that going on where you're trying to make split-second decisions, and maybe you see something out of the corner of your eye if it's like a new implement, and you see someone do something, you're like, oh, I need to try that because that looks more efficient. And often I'll be listening to my judge while simultaneously listening to the judges to my left and my right to hear their rep counts. So yeah, lots going on.
So speaking of processing information, we all know that you are very analytical when it comes to workouts, and we're following Emily Rolfe through the season this year. And through that, we've asked her questions as she says that she's talked to you through like quarterfinals and stuff like that. And that you are very analytical in your advice to her. Like at this minute and second, I was at this point, and are you doing that on the floor of a competition? Are you looking for the clock to see, am I on pace, or do you go by feel once you hit the competition floor?
From my experience competing in live competitions, I rarely, if ever, look at the clock, at least not frequently, because you just can't rely on it being in your line of sight, like in a convenient location. So there's going to be certain events, certain workouts, whether you're at Wodapalooza or wherever you are, Dubai, where you just might not be able to see a clock. There just might not be a clock. And, I like wearing a watch, but sometimes you can't wear, if you're doing like kettlebell snatches, you can't wear a watch. So in quarterfinals, the open online competitions, I definitely use the clock, or I have someone like shouting splits or something like that. You're 5 seconds ahead of pace if I have a pace plan. On the competition floor, it's a little more fluid, but I'll still have, general ideas of like, pacing strategies. And so, if I'm rowing, I know exactly how long the rower should take because the screen's right there in my face. And then if I'm doing, let's say, chest to bars, it's like, okay, you're going to break it down into these sets, and your breaks are going to be either short, really short, medium, or long, and so you kind of have those, and that might be timed, probably less likely timed by the clock and more likely timed by intuition, or maybe breaths. You might count your, do 3 slow breaths or something, and that'll be your break, and 3 slow breaths is going to be, 6 seconds or something. So.
Yeah, my guess is my slow breaths are way slower than yours.
Well, in a yeah, maybe, but in a workout, slow breaths aren't so slow. So
yeah, that's true.
So one more follow up with the thing with Emily is she gets advice sometimes from you and Pat, and we asked her like, what's the difference between the two? And she said, well, with Brent, it's very, very numbers driven. It is like I held this pace on the row. I was at this place for transition. I gave myself 6 seconds for that transition. And when it's Pat, it's just go faster.
Yeah. And that's sort of true. But, when I have long chats with Pat, he's it's more like it's definitely less numbers based, but he still gets to the same place as me in most workouts. He would still give more or less the same advice, but it would be, well, hold a threshold pace on the rower and then, transition really fast. And for me, like, I just watch a lot of my own footage in training. And so I start to see, you don't know what you're looking for at first when you're watching your own film. In other sports, they say like, oh, I got to go watch the game tape. They say that all the time. If you're watching football or basketball, got to go watch game film. And so with CrossFit, I do that as well, with my training and with my competing. And at first you do that and you don't really even know what you're looking for. But then over time, you might have a little clock next to your stopwatch, whatever. And you start to see those trends. You're like, a fast transition is usually like 3 to 5 seconds. A slow transition or a long break, let's say between sets of chest to bar, like a fast break is 3 to 5 seconds. A long break is when it gets to like 6 to 10 or 12. So like Pat will say, oh, I took a short break. And to me, I'm like, oh, I know that's 4 seconds, right? And I just kind of know that, or I'll watch it. And I'm like, sure enough, it's 4 seconds. And so we'll come to the same conclusions. And, I'm just a little more like numbers and analytical driven, whereas Pat is more like sensations. He's like, oh, I decided to take, but even before the workout, he's like, oh, I'll do my wall balls, but if I feel like my shoulders are blowing up, I'll take some short breaks to ensure that my shoulders feel fresh for the handstand walks, where I might say, oh, I'm going to break it up, probably something like 20, 10, 10, 10 with short breaks to minute, but we'll end up doing about the same reps. I might switch it on the fly. If it's feeling good, I might go, 30, 10, 10 instead, one less break. We kind of Pat and I, like, assuming we have the same skill level in the same workout, we'll probably get to the same place. We just kind of leverage different characteristics, and I've tried to do it the other way and it doesn't work for me because that's not my personality type. And I'm sure it's the same for certain athletes if they're more, if they're less analytical than me, like trying to do it my way and pushing themselves into that mold. Something to consider, if and when I ever coach an athlete, if they're not wired like me, I need to find a way to speak to them to get them to the same conclusion, which is like pace the workout appropriately. Don't do stupid things, go as fast as you can. Yeah.
I think she was doing it to be funny. And then she kind of explained it as that, that Pat is a very natural athlete and that maybe you and her had to work at it a little bit more to get there. So in his head, it's just do it. Where in your two heads, it's more, this is what we need to get there because we had to work harder to get to that point.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I think Pat's worked real hard too, though. So it's just different. I think it's just leveraging different personality types to get you to, the same conclusion, which is, go as fast as you can in a workout. Yeah.
Yeah. In my mind, I'm guessing that Pat is doing all that analytical stuff. He's just not articulating it in the same way that you may be.
I think so. Yeah. I think in a different way. And Pat, Pat is like, really well-spoken guy, super intelligent, educated, all those things. And like, we'll have talks about, name a thing. And, he's got like nuanced opinions and stuff. And so I think, he's like maybe a little less numbers driven than me, but definitely, I wouldn't categorize Pat. If there was a category of like analytical, thoughtful CrossFitters and CrossFitters that just send it, I definitely still put Pat in the analytical category. And there's CrossFitters that are very successful in the just send it category too. But.
So you mentioned about videoing and reviewing your own videos, and I think that's such an important part, especially when you're working out a lot, by yourself. So like you're essentially having to video that so you can coach yourself as well. Do you send that off to get additional coaching besides yourself?
Yeah. So my coach is David Spur. He lives in Winnipeg, which, for those that don't know, that's very far away in Canada terms. Okay. And, like we'll see each other in person a couple times a year, but I mean, I don't really like overwhelm him with all the videos I take because that would just be a lot of his time. And the thing I recommend to most people is like, hey, no matter how good your coach is or how much time they have, like you need to take it on yourself to figure these things out. And I feel the same way, because I'm the one who's living it. But I do still send like pieces of them, or if there's, a workout that's of particular importance, so I'm like, hey, here's the full workout, watch it or whatever if you want to. But usually it's more just like, hey, I did an EMOM yesterday, and I'll like send the first and last set of, bar muscle ups, because we're working on some technical things there. So it's like, hey, this is what they look like when I was fresh. This is what they look like in the last set. And like, I think, this is what I need to improve on. And, maybe there's some tips and tricks, but yeah.
Nice.
So I watched your podcast with Training Think Tank.
Yep.
And it was really, really good.
Really well
I
done.
really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it a
Thanks.
lot. And one thing I wanted to kind of dive into a little bit is when you were coming up through the sport, you had that 14, 15 year where you just missed the games.
Yep.
And you actually said in that podcast that you contemplated quitting after the 15 season. Now, that could have been a 5-second thought. It could have been a 2-day thought, maybe even longer. I don't know. But do you think that you had to have that moment to flip a switch into something different to have the success you had following that moment?
So it was, that thought was, a couple weeks sort of. And I don't think that type of conversation is necessary to facilitate, like high performance. I think given the situation I'd put myself in, which was putting like an extreme amount of pressure on myself, not enjoying the training, just putting so much pressure on myself that I needed to have a shift and have a change where, I was starting to enjoy the training again and do it for, the love of it. And basically, the big kind of key banner slogan for that year was surrender the outcome. It's like, hey, you have to be willing to put in another really hard year of work and, keep doing this, all these little sacrifices and this dedication, and just be okay with going back to regionals and not qualifying. Like that's a very realistic possibility because it just happened 2 years in a row where you did everything you felt you could and it still wasn't enough. And you have to know that that's still possible, that you could, again, do everything right, do everything you think you need to do, and you still come up short. And I know that's a possibility this year too. So like for me, I think that was just an important reframing of priorities. And then it worked out for me, but it's kind of like, you hear the story of like the Beatles and there's some manager that says, oh, you guys suck, you'll never make it. And they're like, see, we told you, we made it and we're the best band ever. But there's also a lot of stories of bands who were told by managers, you're never going to make it. And the manager was right and they never made it. So it's kind of like,
Right.
Just because you had like failure at a competition and you almost consider quitting, and then you say, you know what, this year I'm going to put in more work, it doesn't mean you're going to succeed. So for those of you watching, enjoy the process, right? You have to enjoy the training. And, there's only so many people that get a gold medal. There's only so many people that get the invite to the next stage of the season if we're talking CrossFit. So you have to enjoy the training and enjoy that process. And that has to be as important or more important than some like, finish line expectation.
So what I want to lead this into is we talk to a lot of athletes who beat themselves up over a weekend and say, you know what, I missed this and I missed that. And I've said to a few of them, like, I grew up as a swimmer, and in my life, I may have swam 2 perfect races.
Yeah.
In my life. And how can you expect a weekend to go perfectly when you're doing 37 different movements over all of these events, right? But then on Training Think Tank, you talked about 2016 regionals being maybe your perfect race.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like that was the perfect moment in your career?
Yeah, I don't know about the perfect moment, but I think I had enough experience as an athlete at that point where I was, let's see, 2016, how old? I would have been 25 years old at that point, where I just knew when the weekend finished that it was just like a very special, like I guess in the John Wooden sense, like competitive greatness kind of moment where I was like, oh, wow, I executed very well this weekend. Like as far as what my potential was relative to those tests, I just nailed it. I would say to those people you're talking to, I think too often people will finish a competition and they'll look at the leaderboard and they'll go, oh, I finished, let's say 6th. And, I missed that one. I got that no rep on those 2 wall balls, and I did, I mispaced this. And like, they made all these little mistakes, and they start like looking at the leaderboard, shifting to like, oh, wow, if I would have done all those things right instead of 6th, I would have been 4th. You have to understand that people in 5th, 4th, 3rd, 2nd, 1st, they also probably made the same amount of mistakes, maybe more. And so it's like, if you get to go in your time machine and theoretically change a mistake, then they also get the time machine, and then you're probably still going to end up in sixth, because everyone will just keep fixing an error and gaining 3 more points into, infinity. So, usually where you end up in a competition is more or less where you belong. And if you were just fitter, you would have just placed higher, given the same amount of mistakes. I mean, you obviously still it doesn't mean you should stop trying to make, mistakes. And but I think there's a difference between like an error of like preparation and just an error on the field where you like, oh, I pushed a little too hard here and then I blew up, or, oh, I just didn't quite pace it. And then I pushed hard at the end, and like those little things, or I got a couple no reps. Those things just happen, right? I mean, everyone's going to have those. Tia Claire Toomey, she's had those, right? Like, and she still won the games because she's better. But yeah, and then I think in, kind of the context of your question with 2016, for me, that was just, it was just kind of like a really, part of that too is I think we had at least a week, maybe 3 weeks with those workouts. So I went through the workouts and I just had a lot of time to like mentally visualize those workouts, like a lot of times. And so I just really knew what I needed to do. So that's something, I'll have 2 weeks with these workouts for semis this year. And so it's something I want to try to prioritize is, getting in the float tank and, meditating and like really just like going through the workout over and over again, exactly how I want it to go, to try to at least get as close to my potential. It doesn't mean I'm going to win every workout or win the semis, but hopefully closer to my potential and get close to that 2016 feeling again.
Corey says, nobody else can use my time machine, Brent. I'm selfish with my DeLorean.
Jerk.
So how have your weaknesses changed over time? And have some of those previous weaknesses become strengths of yours now?
It's a good question. Most of my weaknesses I started with are still my weaknesses. I actually used to not be good at rope climbs. My pinch was really inefficient. I couldn't do like legless really to save my life. Like when the legless showed up at the 2014 regionals, I was really afraid of that and ended up getting a decent score. But I wouldn't say legless are a strength of mine, but I wouldn't call them a weakness. And then my rope climbs with a pinch are probably one of my best movements now. But when I started, strict handstand push-ups, heavy deadlifts, heavy front squats were a weakness, and they still are, relative. And it's all relative to the field. I mean, when I first started, my goal was to deadlift 365 pounds. And now, at the games, I think I deadlifted 505 in 2018. So like that's went up, but relative to the field, it's still not a, top, let's say 10 or 20 deadlift, even at the CrossFit games, probably. So, I think some of those weaknesses have more or less stayed the same. And I think as I've trained longer, been doing this for so long, spent so much time on those weaknesses, sometimes things that used to be strengths, you don't focus on because you're like, hey, I need to get better at these things. And then those start to, there've been times where, for example, my double unders got a little worse. Like when I started, that was a huge strength of mine. Used to warm up with those for volleyball. So, I started CrossFit and they're like, oh, double unders are like a thing, right? And I could do, I think, 300 unbroken and 35 triple unders unbroken, like walking into the gym. Yeah. So now, I think we did a 10-minute AMRAP of double unders and I got, I don't even know, like 900 or something, just would trip, restart every, minute or so. But there have been times because I have been very good at those things that, I got a little worse and I'm like, oh, come on, Brent, you got to shore those up again and, get them back to where they were. So that's probably more the story of my training as opposed to my weaknesses are still my weaknesses, not as much, and hopefully not as much to keep me out of like high finishing at competitions. But it's more like the things I came in that were I really excelled at, like the double unders, at times have decreased in, how good they are relative to the best.
Sure. Well, and when your focus changes, right? Like if you're working on a new skill, then something else has to give a little bit. So that makes
absolutely
sense.
Yeah.
You all right there, Scott?
Sorry, my earbud went out. I had to reset it.
That's okay. I was like,
let me check. I think I'm only getting you in my right ear right now.
Oh, can you hear us?
Yeah, I don't know.
How about now?
Wrong with... Yeah. So at first I thought I was just getting Amy in this one. It was like a right-left kind of stereo action. And then Scott was talking, and I'm like, no, it's just my right. So I don't know. I'll just make sure my wife only talks to me in my left ear tonight, and then I'll kind of balance it out, and I don't get tinnitus or something.
Yeah, both of mine went out completely, so I just saw
Okay.
lips, and I am not good at reading lips.
Yeah,
But,
everything I said was
one
great,
of
so.
Yeah, it was.
one of our listeners jumped in and said that they loved what you're saying about visualization, and it's something that they've been trying to do themselves as a masters athlete. And so, you said you go into a flow tank. Is it a special thing that you go into, or is it just your saying of whatever it is?
Oh, float, 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 like a sensory deprivation tank with the Epsom salts and stuff. You can do it anywhere, right? I mean, for me, that's just, I'm a busy guy, and I just find myself getting distracted, and so that's like an opportunity when I'm in there. It's like, all right, all you can do here is either think or sleep, and that's those are the only two options. There's no noise, there's no, you don't sense anything. That's the whole point, right? It's the same temperature, and you're just floating there. So, but yeah, even just we used to do it in swimming when I was young, where we would lie on the pool deck, and coach would kind of like guide us through a visualization, just kind of like calm us down, and then okay, pick your race, and he would even start a clock, and we'd try to see how close we could get to our goal swimming time. And you'd end up getting pretty close over time because you knew how many strokes it took, and like, oh, I want to swim a 100 fly in a 105 or something, and sure enough, you'd look up at the clock, it'd be like 106, and so you get pretty close. So yeah, I would just say, like, for most people, probably just, I mean, there's, I'm sure, a million YouTube videos, but probably just start with a movement. Just like visualize yourself doing touch and go power snatches or ring muscle ups, and how you want them to look. And that can either be first person or third person. So either through your eyes or like a video game, like watching from a distance, either of those, whatever works for you. And then, yeah, you can just kind of slowly progress that out into, full workouts. And, you can do it before a workout or after a workout, or, it's just something to practice. I'm no expert on it, but
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So back to like your weaknesses and what you've done. One of the things that really fascinated me on the TTT podcast was you said that you have taken, I think you said 3 steps back on your muscle ups so that you can get 1 step better overall, because you just couldn't keep doing them the way you were and be efficient enough to be competitive.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's, I think that's the big fear that people have with changing technique. Like even as something as simple as a burpee, I'll watch someone who's pretty competitive, do a burpee, then I'm like, oh, it's kind of sloppy. Like you're kind of bleeding energy, or just any movement. And that's how I do them. And I have a competition in 2 months. So like, or a month, or name a period of time. It doesn't really matter what it is. Like I can't change them now. This is how I do them. And it's like, no, there's like really there's no such thing as too early or too late. It's like the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. And with, changing technique, I've helped people, like, this isn't about me helping people, but like I've helped games athletes and semi-final athletes. I've given them a cue in a session that has been like, oh, wow, that really helped. Like, let's say rope climbs with a pinch. It's something I'm pretty good at coaching. Or, wall balls. Like, it's like, oh, like just something like foot position or hand position, or, thinking about driving through your feet instead of your arms, or whatever it is. You can make like pretty big changes pretty quickly. It doesn't have, it's going to take me months and months for that to, change. It's like, well, no, with a rope climb, if you ever work out with 10 rope climbs, like I can give you a cue right now that'll probably make the first 3 a little easier. And then as you get tired, yeah, you're going to fall back into your old habits, maybe for those last 7, but you did the first 3 a little faster and with a little less energy, just with 1 or 2 cues. And so with the ring muscle ups, for me, among 100 other movements, just constantly trying to make them better, right? Just watching videos of athletes that are beating me, quite frankly, in muscle up workouts, and trying to figure out, well, what are they doing differently than me? And so watching their videos, watching my videos, and that's really what's been the difference. I've reached out to, you name a coach with, gymnastics coach, and that's helped. It's not like a slight against anyone who's tried to help me ring muscle ups, but really it's just come down to me watching videos, and my coach, David Spur, who is not a ring muscle up expert, but we just watched video after video of people that are doing well in ring muscle up workouts, whether that's, Christy Aramo O'Connell, Patrick Vellner, Logan Collins, Zeke Grove, even, Tia Claire Toomey's up there too. And just like seeing what they're doing and just trying to emulate that, watching my videos, like, and slowing it down, slowing them both down side by side. And it's like those, puzzles in the back of the Archie comic. Like, can you spot the 6 differences between these 2 photos? And you're just like freeze framing and you're going, oh, like, their feet are here, their hips are here. Why are their shoulders there and mine are not? Go up and do another set of 3 and see if you can figure that out. And you just keep doing it until you figure it out. And then you try to hold on to those new cues and, keep notes so that the next time you come back to that skill, whether it's a day or a week or a month later, you pull up the notes. Okay, the last time I did ring muscle ups, I was focusing on catching higher, relaxing through the turnover, letting the feet swing through, driving the knees to the chest instead of my feet to my butt, or whatever the cue might be. And then just doing that for every single movement every day.
Yeah.
It's easy.
So there is short-term sacrifice in that thought process.
Oh yeah.
For long-term gain. And do you think what percentage of athletes do you think are willing to make that short-term sacrifice for that?
Yeah, really that's what it comes down to. I can't really say. I don't train with enough athletes to really know. And I'm not sure if they're even realizing that that's an option, or that they're intentionally making that trade-off, might be the better way to put it. But so for example, let's say the workout is, 400-meter run, 10 snatches at 135, 10 burpees for 3 rounds. Just like, that sounds like a CrossFit workout, right? And so I think there's kind of 2 ways to do that. One is just to go as hard as you can, try to get a great score. And, maybe your runs are pretty fast, you snatches, touch and go, and you do your burpees fast. Like, sweet, made some progress. You finish, your heart rate's at, 200 beats per minute. You went really hard and you're like, man, I got fitter. I got a little better at barbell cycling, got a little better at burpees, running, all those things. Check the boxes. In my opinion, it's like, maybe instead of finishing at a 10 out of 10 exhaustion and 200 beats per minute, maybe you're finishing at like a 9 out of 10 exhaustion and 185 beats per minute heart rate. So, you went a little slower. So your time like maybe wasn't as good, but you were focusing on some very specific technical things in all 3 of those movements. I think you got better doing it a little slower. Like, that's my personal opinion. And there's a time and a place to empty the tank and go as hard as you can. And I think you can be, if you have the ability in your programming, you can kind of pick and choose. It's like, oh, I know these movements I'm really competent in, so I'm going to drop the hammer and go really hard with these 5 or 10 or 20 movements that I'm like technically really competent in. But then in the movements that you're like still trying to tweak and change, it's like a bit of the concession where you go, hey, I'm going to make a trade-off in this WOD or this workout or this EMOM, where maybe I'm going a little slower, I'm doing fewer reps, or whatever that looks like in the context of that workout. I'm going to get a worse score on the leaderboard if I'm posting it at my gym, or I'm posting it on like a training blog, or sending it to my coach. It's like, hey, I'm going to go a little bit slower. Not that much slower. I think, the concession there is like, instead of finishing that workout in 9 minutes, you're probably going to finish it in 9 minutes, 30 seconds, which in the context of like gaining physiological fitness isn't really going to change anything. But if your 30 snatches and 30 burpees were technically way better, you're just putting more deposits. I think this was something I talked about on the Training Think Tank podcast, is like, you're just putting more deposits in the bank on like the good technical side as opposed to the bad technical side. And over time, if all your deposits are in that good bank, then when you get really tired of the competition and you do want to drop the hammer, that's how your body's going to move. And that more or less, like when you watch people winning the games and winning semis and doing really well, guess what? They're moving really well. And there's only one way that happens, and that's to move well all the time. It's not something that just magically happens one day. Oh, one day my snatch is going to look great. It's like, no, you have to drop a few pounds off the bar. Instead of like maxing out, you have to stay below 80% or 70 or 60 or 50%. And Jamie Latimer just says, you'll play how you practice. And that's it. Right. I mean, same with swimming, right? I mean, it's not like in swimming, coach would be like, okay, well, and we're going to do some sprint pieces and throw all the technique we've been working on out the window and just thrash around. It's like, no, you go as fast as you can while holding the technique, because the only way you're going to be successful in swimming is with good body position and good mechanics. And I feel like with CrossFit, if your goal for success is long-term and like high level success, you need to be efficient in your movement. And that's, at least that's what's worked for me. And I think if you look at, again, the people that are consistently doing well, like Rich Froning or Matt Fraser, like those guys move pretty well, right? Tia moves pretty well. There's not a lot of movements where you're like, oh, that doesn't look so good.
So Corey Leonard says, as a master's athlete, I feel like what he's saying right now is on a spiritual level. It's training versus competing.
Yeah.
I train 90% of the time and I compete the other 10 has helped me a ton.
Yeah. And you can do more work too. And I mean, I'm not someone who like believes in like, oh, you got to get in more volume. Like volume's, a knob on your stereo system, right? But there's a lot of things you need to practice in CrossFit. It's something that like needs to be considered. It's like, if you just want to get practice at all of these things, there's quite a lot of time that needs to be spent in the gym. And the tough thing is a lot of these movements are like they're exclusively high power movements. There's no way to make a ring muscle up like zone 2, or cyclical. It's like, man, ring muscle ups and like 40-inch box jumps and like some of these things are just high power movements. And so you need to find a way to kind of keep them as the least damaging as possible to allow you to train again in the afternoon or the next day. And so to get through all of that, the intensity sometimes needs to come down a little bit to practice all those movements. And then, going hard, like the masters athlete just said, 10% of the time is plenty.
So I want to address one more thing, and then I want to get into like some game stuff, like philosophical, and that is, traditionally you've never been a great online competitor.
Yep.
You may believe that or not, but this year in quarterfinals, you made a significant leap from where you have been in the past. Can you attribute it to some of this work you've been doing over the past few years on efficiencies of movement? Or do you think it was just, you got lucky with the movements that were picked this year?
Yeah. When it comes to online competitions, like I'm super aware that, if you just look on paper, statistically speaking, I'm not doing as well in online competitions as in-person competitions. It's just a undeniable fact. It's no different than, it's just the way that it is. And I, trust me, I've tried to figure out like the reason behind that. And I guess I have to believe this, but I think it's more everyone else and not me. Cause like I push just as hard in online competitions as I do in person, and I prepare just as well most of the time. And, in some situations, obviously there's some, like the Open the last 2 years, I haven't peaked for it in the same way physically. Once I did the workouts, I was doing them the best I could in those moments for sure. But I wasn't like, changing my training and altering my training in a massive way to be at my absolute best for those workouts. But I don't think a lot of people were. Anyway, I think this year is really, a lot of it comes down to other athletes and the workouts, right? And I think if you look at the types of movements and the duration of workouts that are typically at online competitions, you're going to have more movements that are kind of, I call it phone booth fitness, where you can kind of do it all in a phone booth and you're just sort of vibrating up and down. And that's just not as good for me, being a taller athlete. And then the workouts are often just shorter in duration. So those are kind of two things that play a big part. And then I'd say just movement quality. Like I don't get a lot of no reps online or in person. And, like I can't speak to every situation, but there are people that I've competed against and, they're starting to get no reps and I start to gain ground on them. And I'm like, oh, I don't know. Like, I wonder what your reps look like in the Open or in the quarters, And I think I just perform well under pressure as well. And I think there's something to be said about, I perform, I think, as well in my gym as I do on the floor, maybe even better on the floor a little bit. And I think some people definitely can allow the pressure of the moment in a real competition, let's say at semis, to get to them. And, oh man, I had my strategy and I got out there and I panicked. Like I've heard that from really good athletes. I just, everyone was going touch and go. I was going to do singles. I said, screw it. And I went touch and go. And then the whole thing exploded. And I went 2 minutes slower than practice. And I was like, I just went singles. Like I didn't really care about everyone going touch and go. Like that's just how I kind of operate. And yeah, I'm excited about my finish in quarterfinals. Like, but in the same token, if I had a mediocre finish in quarters, I wouldn't have given it much consideration. So I think it can be a mistake to, there's definitely a temptation on my side. If I do well in an online event, I go, hell yeah, I'm so fit right now. Like I'm crushing it.
Yeah.
And then if I do poorly, I'm like, everyone's cheating. Everyone's stupid. Online competitions are stupid. Screw this. I'm just excited to get the semis. So I have to understand that I can't really have both. And so I'm going to mostly stick on the side of, hey, the purpose of these online events, it's like preseason, right?
Yes,
It's
to get you to the next thing.
To the thing, the actual real thing. And like if I had it my way, I would just try to eliminate as many online competitions as possible, turn as many online comps into in-person comps as possible. Like that's where I think, I'd love to see things change for everyone. But I am still happy with the quarterfinal performance. Yeah, still happy about it. But
I have a question for you about one of the movements, because since it came up in the games. So prior to the games, had you practiced wall-facing handstand push-ups before? Had that been a part of your training?
Not really. No, I mean, I might have done a total of 20 wall-facing handstand push-ups in 10 years, maybe 30. Like I do a wall. I thought it was like, oh, that could come up, especially once we had wall walks in the open. So, I would do like a wall walk into 5 strict wall-facing handstand push-ups, and I was like, oh, like these are hard. But I can do them. And so I was like, okay, check. And I just didn't really like put any effort into, finding the nuances to make that movement better. It was more like, well, I can do them. I don't know how well I can do them relative to the field because I don't know what anyone else can do with these, but I can do them easy enough. And I was hoping more people, when I did them, I was like, oh, these might be hard from a mobility standpoint. So maybe that'll be my like ace in the hole. Sure enough, it was not. And it still is not. They're harder than a normal or what we would consider a old school handstand push-up. But I think they still more or less reward. You just got to have a really strong press,
Yeah. So being the analytical person with this, in those moments when they announce this new movement before the event at the games, are you looking at that and breaking down the movements to see how it's best to perform that? Or are you at that point saying, I'm going to go by feel and trust my instincts?
Yeah, it really depends obviously on the movement and how much time we have before the workout starts. With that one for sure, we were probably accumulating more reps than usual, way more reps than if it was just a normal strict handstand push-up. I would have done like 3, like I'd warm up really good. I'd do 1 flat, I'd do 2 deficit and be like, all right, here we go. Whereas I probably did closer to, I didn't count, but at least 10. Because you're also trying to figure out, well, how low do I need to go? Because there's no contact point. So my coach is down there, he's filming. I'm like, was that deep enough? He's like, maybe. So you're trying to try to find a visual or sensory kind of point where you're like, yes, I believe that when I feel this or when my eyes see this, I know that I have reached this deficit, and then I can continue to push up. So that was a lot of it. And then, you're watching everyone else, men and women trying to do them and, seeing like, oh, where should I put my hands and how should my elbows point? And should I reach with my forehead or should I reach with like the top of my head? So there was a lot of that going on. And all of that worked tremendously. And I won the workout at the games. No, I'm kidding. I came like that. I just, like those are really hard. And no excuses. They were just like really hard. And, I'm going to continue to working on them every day pretty much. But, I'm not naive to the fact that if we did that workout again this year, I probably still would not win it. I definitely would not win it. And that's okay. But yeah.
So Kenneth asks, what was your reaction to the sandbag, your performance in the sandbag event?
Yeah, I was excited about it. Obviously, there was a little bit of, at that point in the weekend, things weren't going like really well on an overall leaderboard standpoint. I was still having fun and doing my best, but I think kind of ironically, like, I think if I was like in the hunt for like a medal position or a top spot, that performance would have been like, yes, like good. We got lots of points, edged out some other guys that, were near the top of the leaderboard, gained ground essentially on other guys. And so that's what's important. That's awesome. At that point in the weekend, wasn't as placed as high. And so the fact that I was so close to winning that event, and because that event was so iconic and the crowd was so into it, and I was a little bummed. I was like, oh man, I was so close to winning that workout, like winning a strength workout at the CrossFit Games, and kind of realizing like, yeah, that chance might not come along again, where you're going to have the whole crowd roaring, and it's a strength workout, 1 rep max at the CrossFit Games. Everyone was so into it. The intensity in there was crazy. And I was so close to getting that last sandbag. And you finish and you're just like, oh my gosh, Brent, like, what have you done? Like, that would have been so epic. That would have been, on the highlight reel of your, competitive CrossFit season or multiple seasons. Like, that would be right there on the highlight reel. And missed out on that. I ended up finishing 3rd in that workout. And I was the closest to getting the final bag at 350, and then all the guys that got 340, there were 4 of us. We did the tie break, and I came 3rd in the tie break. So kind of a little bit, it's a little that's I don't look back on. There's very few things I look back on that like keep me up at night or I regret, but that's probably the biggest one for sure. In the last 10 years, it's definitely up there as like, oh, like, you idiot, but. Yeah, what do you do?
Well, and Saturday night was a mini run for you. You finished 2nd in hat trick and then 3rd in the sandbag.
Yeah.
But Kenneth follows up with, how close were you to passing out during that sandbag?
I was getting
and
lightheaded.
Elise follows up with, or pooping.
No pooping, not close at all. I was getting lightheaded kind of in some of the earlier bags. I think we did a total of 12 bags, maybe. And so it was kind of the first 4. There were 2 there where I was getting really lightheaded, and but I was able to get some, just drink what was left of my drink, and just some carbs and protein, and that seemed to help, and just sit down for a bit, and then I was fine. But it was just the first few bags where I was like, oh man, I'm getting really lightheaded. Not something that's really happened to me before, but.
So I want to move into your role in the PFAA and some things you said on Training Think Tank podcast, which got me really fired up. And that is they, in a good way, Yeah, you brought up the lack of definition in movements. And I've been pounding a drum forever that the open and the different levels of qualification don't have definitions at CrossFit. Like, the reason you can attack what the open is because CrossFit doesn't tell you what it should be. And so everybody has a different perception as to what it is to them. And none of us agree. So then we start arguing over why this is bad and why that's bad.
Yep. Yeah, I would agree. Some people say, oh, that the first workout of the open this year was, it was too hard. It wasn't inclusive. Like, toes to bar are really tough. And then other people are like, well, toes to bar aren't that tough. Toes to bar are pretty inclusive, at least compared to a ring muscle up they are. And someone will say, oh, you shouldn't have ring muscle ups in the first week of the open, or whatever. People are just going to have differing opinions. And I think what's challenging, and this obviously it's super challenging for CrossFit. I don't envy it. Is like, you're trying to please everyone, right? You're trying to create 3 workouts that are pleasing, the everyday gym goer who just wants to race, get their name on the leaderboard, have a good time. You're trying to send the right people to quarters. You're trying to, maybe make these levels like a level 1 through 10 CrossFitter and create workouts that are appropriate for sorting everyone from worst to last. You're trying to, and then, obviously you're trying to sort athletes for quarters, which is top 10%. But then you're also trying to find, the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and give prize money to them. So there's like a lot of boxes that they're trying to check, right? So it's super tough to come up with workouts that are both like suitable to do those things, but also elegant, because, you could do like some really wonky, I mean, they've done stuff like this, not this exactly, but it's like, oh, you have like a 3-minute window and it's just single unders, 10-pound wall balls, and like burpees. And then the next round, all the, every round the skills get harder and harder, but you can't do that for 3 weeks in a row, right? Like, at a certain point, you need a workout that's like kind of heavy deadlifts and chest to bars. And there's going to be some people who say, oh, that's too hard. And others that say, well, it's still not heavy enough for the best. So yeah, it's challenging when you're definitely trying to like basically be all things to all people. Is really not an easy thing to do.
And with a lack of definition, you're just throwing spaghetti at the wall.
Yeah, potentially, right? I think with the lack of definition, then you're leaving it up to us to, make our own definition, which can work at times, but then it can obviously, be frustrating as well when it's like, well, even the quarterfinals, for example. Like, I think the quarterfinal workouts this year, I said to someone, like, I personally, on just like I enjoyed the workouts. Like, it felt like doing like the CrossFit games in a way, because it was like these, kind of 3 new movements, like the wall facing handstand push-up, the V-snap, the crossovers. You're kind of like adapting. There's a little bit of stress there. You're having to like adapt through the workout. Like, your crossovers are getting better as you go. You didn't know how those handstand push-ups were going to feel at the end of that workout, all those things. So like, I enjoyed that, just the actual act of doing the workouts. But obviously, some of those workouts were very challenging. If you were someone in that 5% to 10%, you're like, I'm going to do quarter workouts for fun. I know I'm not making semis. Those workouts probably weren't appropriate for those people. And I don't know like what the answer is there, if they should be more skewed to inclusivity of that top 10%, or should they be more appropriate to, because I remember a time back in 2013, 14, 15, when people were complaining about the open, saying it's really frustrating to do these open workouts that are just toes to bar burpees and 95-pound thrusters. We're getting people going to regionals, and they get there and they're not capable of doing 100-pound dumbbell snatches, and they're not capable of doing 300-pound deadlifts or 400-pound deadlifts. They're not capable of doing 3 sets of 50 GHDs. And so now we have these workouts that look like regional workouts. So you're getting people to semis, regionals, that are definitely capable of those things. But then there's now you're seeing like, oh man, these weren't good for the top, kind of like people that couldn't make semis but still wanted to have a hot go. I'm like, well, I remember 10 years ago people were complaining about the other thing. And that doesn't, it's hard.
I remember, like 2014, like that was the first open I ever did, and there were double unders. And I remember there being new athletes that were feeling like it wasn't accessible to them because they can't do double unders. So they would spend 10 minutes trying to do double unders. But then CrossFit, brought in the scaled version, which I thought was a great option to be more inclusive to the overall all athletes.
But then I've heard people say the scaled is like too easy.
I agree. Right.
Like we want like an in between. You're like, man, So it's tough, right? It's tough, and that's not that's not talking about the V up standard or whatever, and that's a different. I think I touched on that, obviously training think tank, but just kind of cursory glance, it's like, I think Corey Leonard says the person who tries to please everyone ends up pleasing no one, and I've heard that in like comedy, where as a comedian it's better to be loved by 1,000 people than liked by 10,000. And it's definitely true in comedy, I think, is if you're a comedian. And I think, it's tough if you're trying to please everyone. It's it's tough.
So let's move the definitions to the movement standards. I've also been a proponent as a former judge that I would love that at the beginning of the season, CrossFit said, if we're doing a burpee this season, this is the standard from the beginning of the season to the end of the season. Or if we're doing a thruster, you can't rebend the knee from the beginning of the open to the end of the games.
Yeah.
And it's one standard like defined for this season.
I would really like that. I think it would do a lot of positive things. It would require like a little more. I think there's like certain situations where I'm trying to think of one. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but it was something like a burpee, where maybe you design a workout for the CrossFit Games and it's on the Coliseum and and you go, like that specific burpee standard, doesn't work with this workout, and so then you would have to change the workout to fit the standard. Whereas I think at times, the standard is changed to fit the workout, and so like in my opinion, I would rather the standard be the non-negotiable, and then the workouts, because when you program a workout for a competition, you can literally do anything at this point. It doesn't have to be 21-15-9. It can be 13:62.5. Like, it can be anything, right? It can be any movement. So whenever you make a workout that someone doesn't like something about it, it's like, well, you can just change it, so you have an unlimited possibility. So yeah, I would agree, in my personal opinion, that the movements wouldn't change for the entire season. I think like maybe a compromise in the middle would be at least having like I think I talked about this in Training Think Tank podcast, where it was like, for every movement, or at least the common movements, or at least the movements we've done in the last like decade, have the A standard, or the code yellow standard. And then if there is a reason in a workout to change it, you say, hey guys, we're not using code yellow. We made an orange, and this is the exact reason. But as much as possible, you stick to the yellow standard, which is like the gold standard, the consistent one. Hey guys, we're doing handstand push-ups. Someone raises their hand. Is it the yellow standard? Sure as hell is. All right, great. Moving on. And then everyone just knows that it kind of saves time. The judges at that point have been like, oh, I've been to 3 competitions. We use that standard. I did it in the open, all these things. I know what to look for. I know the points of performance, as opposed to every time you do especially with like burpees and handstand push-ups are 2 that definitely seem to change the most. It's like, oh, like now my feet don't have to be wide, or they do have to be narrow, or they actually have to be touching. And oh, my hands now don't have to be inside a box. They have to be touching a line that's narrow. Oh, and now it's the head can touch the floor. No, now it can't. It has to touch the wall. Or, oh, your butt can't touch the wall. Oh, no, your butt can touch the wall, but only at this part of the rep. It's like, oh, man. Like there's a lot of things that keep changing, and, those are all just for the handstand push-up that keep changing. And so when, athletes are moving fast, there's money on the line. I think it'd be, forget about the athletes. I think it'd just be better for the judges, right? I think it would just allow them to do their jobs and feel confident and be proud of the work they're doing. Forget about my experience completely, right? Like, I mean, I'm going to do what you tell me to do. Realistically, like as an athlete, I'm just going to do what you tell me to do as best as possible, but as fast as possible within what I think you're looking for. But it's almost more about the judges' experience. Like that's kind of that's what I think would just make their job easier, which in turn makes my life less stressful, I think.
And from a coaching standpoint, though, when I'm coaching, I'm trying to coach to the standards of what is out for that year. And when the standards keep changing, it's a constant evolution of my coaching, which that's fine. But it's when you're trying to teach athletes these new movements to focus on this standard. Oh, but never mind that standard. That's not real anymore. We're going to do this standard. It's just.
Yeah, it's tough. I think, I guess my suggestion, if, like to the athletes, the coaches, if you're listening to this right now, definitely first would be, try to research, and like, I just have a good memory for this stuff. And so I kind of know the iterations we've seen of, let's say, a handstand push-up over the years. And so, for example, like hand placement, where do I place my hands in a handstand push-up? So when I'm training, I vary my hand placement quite a bit, right? It seems like over the years, they just keep going narrower and closer to the wall. So when in doubt, just keep getting yourself to basically this, where you're, just like here and you don't have room for your head. But, change up your hand placement. Sometimes go really, really wide. Sometimes go really narrow. Sometimes go way off the wall. Sometimes go really close to the wall. And, when in doubt, try to perform like, feet together, core really tight, reaching up tall like you had to in the open with the tape line on the wall. But yeah, definitely like creating some variance around what the standards are. So know what the standards are. Do your training to those standards. Let's say the last, the most common variations of that standard in the last few years, but then vary it around those a little bit, where you're like, okay, I'm going to move my hands in a little closer. Or like, oh, I'm going to say nothing can touch the wall. I'm going to say everything can touch the wall. I'm going to say, it kind of like change those things up, especially if you're doing, a workout with 3 rounds of 20 strict handstand push-ups. It's like maybe the first set of 20 you do this way. The second set I do this all the time. The second set, you're putting your hands here. The third set, you're putting your hands here. And the rule is you can't, I don't know, whatever. Just like trying to think of something, because that seems to be the flavor of where we're heading, where it's like, oh, like constantly kind of throwing in little wrenches in the mix, like even lunges. It's like, oh, is it lunges for distance or is it lunges for steps? So, like practice both.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
So what I want to finish up with is in this line, because we're coming up on the hour and I want to respect your time, is there's a thought that's come up on our show about, and again, I was a regionals judge. I've judged at Rogue. I've done the big competitions. There's a community of judges out there that are very, very good and want to do the best job possible. How about we certify these judges? We allow them to be hired by whomever to come in during quarterfinals to judge you personally, so you get immediate feedback on your online competition, and that then you don't have to do the video submission,
Right.
because they are certified by CrossFit. You are getting a certified judge who is checking your measurements, checking the tape lines, all of that stuff. You don't have to submit the video. And then they get paid a small stipend to come do that. And it's supporting the ecosystem around CrossFit.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the first thing there that would need to happen would be, a proper like certification system, and that's a business, right? Like that has to be run like a business. It can't be volunteers. So it's like someone needs to create, whether maybe CrossFit does that, and there's a new set of certification systems for judging where there's in person, there's reviews. Let's say I go to, let's say at Wodapalooza, there's like, oh, there's these head judges. You're a level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 judge. And after the competition, the athletes are each workout, maybe they're saying, how good was your judge? How could you hear them? All those sorts of things. They're getting ranked, and then they have the opportunity to climb the ladder. And when they become a 4 to a 5, they get paid more. And if they're a 4 and they're just doing a horrendous job consistently, all of a sudden they're a 3, and then they're a 2. And they have to do upgrading to get back, and they're actually getting reviewed, and that's work, right? It's like that's creating an entire company of a judging company, a judging certification system. It's not something that I have enough knowledge or experience in to spearhead. I would support it in any way that I could, but it's like that's a huge undertaking, and so that would be the first thing. It's not something. It's easy to just, and I'm not being. It's easy to say it, and like I would want it too, but it's a lot of work, and someone needs to want to do it. Someone needs to have the entrepreneurial spirit to really like push that forward. And then of course you need the buy-in from the big events, from Rogue, Wodapalooza, Madrid, obviously the semis, the quarters, the games, to like buy into that. As far as using those judges for quarterfinals, theoretically, sure. I still think that they're probably, I think there's still the opportunity for like, collusion or, little sneaky things going on there. So I still think a video would be necessary, but let me put it to you this way. If you had one of those judges that was like level 3, super legit, integrity, all that stuff, experience, and so if I was willing to pay them to come to my gym and judge me, they were certified, I would still submit the video, but I would be held, again, I haven't thought about this a lot, but I think I would just be held to a different level of video scrutiny than an athlete without one of those judges. So I think, they could still count my reps, right? It's like, because the judge might just say, oh yeah, that was 21. It's like, I was 19. They just lost count. So there's still have to be a penalty for that. But as far as like, oh, this video's kind of, it doesn't look like Brent's hitting full extension, we're going to ding him. It's like, no, like the judge was there. The call was made. This is a good judge. If he thinks Brent hit full extension on those front squats, he hit full extension. We're not going to question that. Or if he saw him touch the top of the rope and like we can't see it, it's like, oh, maybe. It's like, no, you're going to trust that judge. Whereas if you don't have that judge, you're going to get dinged for it. So I think a video would still be necessary, just kind of, but you'd be held to a much, theoretically, again, like, I don't have like a really strong opinion on this, but maybe you'd just be held to a less scrutiny on the video review, be much more cursory glance, like, hey, did they do the movements? Did they do the reps? As opposed to like freeze frame. No, I think his pinky. It's like, no. The judge was there. We're going with the judge. They paid them. We know the judge is legit. It's an option. But yeah, the actual creation of that certification, like, and I know there's good judges out there that are passionate and they love what they do. And, they travel around, they go to Wodapalooza, they go to the big events, they go to Granite Games. But it's like the organization. I mean, I'm trying my best to do it with the PFA. It's a lot of work. It's not going nearly as fast as I'd like. And part of that is, there's a bunch of reasons for that. But it would need to be run, I can say this for sure. It would need to be run like a business. There would need to be money coming in to start it, like a startup, like funding of some sort, whether that's a crowdfunding or companies funding it. And it's like, okay, now we have a couple $1,000s in the bank. This is our business plan. Let's party. That's the only way it would work. It needs to be highly organized and people that are working, multiple hours a week on it year round. A lot of work.
Yeah.
I think what's tough is in the open division, they can always say, well, you know, Tia still won, so we did what was right, right? And that's their what they lean into. But you look at like the age groups and how much online competition they're forced to do in comparison to the open division, and how that would legitimize that a little bit more and make that more relevant, which would then again in turn grow the ecosystem all around CrossFit and not just what we see in the top 40.
Yeah, I mean, you know, masters and teenagers and so forth. Yeah, they have to compete online a lot. I think the, you know, the argument of, well, you know, TO1, it's a great test. It's kind of like if you're a, you know, we use the word test, so it's like it'd be the same as saying like, oh, you know, I'm a great teacher. My test in, you know, grade 12 science was great because the smartest person here got the highest grade. Moving on, it's like, well, you know, you could, if the smartest person's the smartest person, so they probably would have passed the test even if you accidentally tested them in, you know, biology and this is chemistry. You know, they're the smartest person in the class. But yeah, I think like I said, moving away from any and all online competitions to something that more and more closely resembles in-person competitions is great. I think for the masters, because historically and teenagers, most of them are in North America. I don't think it's out of the question, you know, for games qualification where maybe you do like, you know, an in-person competition in the States, like let's call it semifinals, where the podium makes it to the games or something like that, whoever can make it, or even the top two, and then the remaining 8, you know, make it via the online qualifier. Like, you know, you could easily do that through like the Masters Fitness Collective, kind of have like a, kind of call it the wild card or whatever you want to call it, because I think a lot of them would love that. You know, sent the first place person from Wadapalooza, the first place person from Masters Fitness Collective, and then 8 more. You know, because it's just, and then at least there's like a lot more riding on that event, and you're, instead of just 10 people getting a competition that has like, let's call it meaning, you're getting maybe 40 to 60 that are going to like an event where it's like, oh man, there's something really riding on this, and this is like, you know, real feather in my hat just making it here to this event because someone here is going to be a games athlete by the end of the weekend. That's pretty cool. So yeah, any and all, and it's the same with quarters, right? I don't think it's unrealistic that, you know, especially with the way that like Mayhem did it this year, Invictus, Training Think Tank, Proven, where they did their quarterfinals at their gym, and there's like a lot of people, right? It's like pretty much a competition at that point. You have 30 to 50 people doing these workouts. You know, it's not out of the question where it's like, oh, actually, you know, like, yeah, they're doing the workouts, but also if you finish top 3, you know, you make it to semis. And so all of a sudden it's like, not only are you just racing the leaderboard, it's like kind of racing each other in there. And then it's like, oh, maybe I'll go down to, you know, one of those places for quarters, try to just win. And then, you know, it's like kind of something, there's just like more to it than just, oh, here I am like racing my clock again, you know, and hope that's enough. It's like, no, if I'm there and I'm watching everyone, I believe that I can come out on top. And then that's like cementing the position, as opposed to like finishing these workouts thinking like, man, I think I did pretty well. And then you're like, oh, you're 61st. You know? So lots of options.
Well, and I keep saying the word ecosystem, but that's another way to get more money into the overall ecosystem, because Mayhem could charge tickets to come in and watch that event, and people would pay to come in and do that. And then it grows the entire ecosystem.
Yeah. You know, I think there's a lot of people that are either like really passionate or semi-passionate about, you know, CrossFit, watching CrossFit. And, you know, it's like, how do we get money out of those people? Not that that's what we're like the main goal, but, you know, it's not impossible that some of those people might be interested in, you know, doing more than just spending $20 in the open and then watching the free live streams, semis, in the games, right? There's probably a lot of CrossFitters that, and, you know, they're going to buy shoes and they're going to purchase products that are related to their own training, or, you know, something that athletes are maybe promoting on their Instagram that's just like an enjoyable product. But yeah, as far as like actually contributing to the live like competition side of the sport, you know, you look at a lot of, I mean, what's interesting is in something like basketball, all of those players make more from their salary than all their endorsements combined, outside of maybe like Steph Curry, LeBron, right? Whereas someone like Chris Bumstead, who's a bodybuilder, he's making way more from his sponsors than he is from competing. Like, it's just astronomically different. And I think a lot of CrossFitters at the elite CrossFitters like myself are making as much or more, at least much more consistently, off of, you know, sponsors than prize money. And I think because the actual viewing experience, like there is the interest, like there is money moving around, especially in like the brands that want to be, even C4 Energy, they want to be involved and get their products out in front of athletes. But like the actual live viewing experience of CrossFit and the consistent opportunity to view those both live in person and online is like very limited. It's not happening that much. And so, the more of those that we can create, like, I think that's where the magic is. It's not like more online. I don't think more online competitions or better online competitions is good, but less of them and more in person is always going to be better for everyone, I think.
As always, the more you say, the more I want to talk. But I'm going to be respectful of your time. And so with that, thank you so much for jumping on with us, Brent. And everybody in the audience, thank you so much for joining us. This was a great hour, and thank you for taking the time out, Brent.
Yeah,
and we will see everybody. We'll see everybody next time on the Clydesdale Media Podcast.